Good night, everyone. I hope you had a good day. Now it's time to rest. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and relax. We're here with you for another calm night. Welcome to Stories for Sleep. I was 10 years old when Grandma came to live with us. It was about 6 months after Granddad passed away, and I guess looking back, she must have been lonely in that big house of theirs, rattling around with only the grief and memories for company. So despite a few protests from Mom, my parents took her in. There were no protests from me, none at all. Grandma was loud and fun, and I loved her. She had an almost limitless supply of boiled sweets, and she'd always slip me a couple whenever she saw me. She was always the first to stick up for me when I got in trouble too, but it was her stories I loved best. Grandma had all kinds of stories. Stories about growing up during World War II, and stories about the things she'd get up to with her friends on the South Coast after her family had been evacuated. Sad stories, funny stories, adventure stories. But it was her scary stories that were my favorite. Grandma had lots of scary stories. She told me she dabbled in the occult when she was a teenager, trying out Ouija boards with her friends, tarot cards, fortune telling, all that stuff. Most of the stories I'd laugh off or forget about not long after she was done telling them. But there were a couple that really did spook me a bit. I was only 10 at the time, you have to understand, and Grandma certainly knew how to bring the stories to life. She'd shut off the lights in my room, so only the glow of the night sky shone through the curtains, and she'd shuffle real close enough so I could see the wrinkles on her face and smell the boiled sweets on her breath, close enough so her deep blue eyes could stare straight into mine. She must have given me nightmares with a few of those tales, but now, years later, there's only one that I can still remember, only one that stuck with me: the story about the shower and Mr. Longfingers. Grandma told me about Mr. Longfingers one night after I asked about her baths. Grandma used to love her baths. She'd spend ages in them, light candles and incense, and lie in the tub, humming to herself until the water turned cold. It drove my mom crazy, but when I asked her why she loved them so much, she said it was the only place she could relax. It was the only place that was safe for her to relax. You know, people like me who are well more sensitive to certain things, we have to have baths, she told me seriously one night, shuffling closer on the bed. I couldn't possibly spend that long in the shower, it'd be far too risky. Grandma stared at me with those blue eyes of hers, unsmiling, and I knew it was time for one of her stories, one of the scary ones. I shivered with pleasure and pulled the covers up to my chin. Why is it risky, Grandma? She half turned to look out the window, watching me from the corner of her eye, pausing for effect. I waited, feeling my heart rate pick up ever so slightly in my chest. Well, she said after a moment, it's only risky if you close your eyes, of course. If you close your eyes for longer than 10 seconds. What do you mean? Why, well, do you ever play that game in the playground with your friends? The one where someone turns their back and the others sneak up on them when they're not looking. I nodded, and Grandma nodded back. Exactly so, that's what it's like in the shower when you have your eyes closed. That's what it's like with Mr. Longfingers. A cold itch tickled back. Who's Mr. Longfingers, Grandma? She let out a deep breath, as if she wished she hadn't said anything, turned her head back to face mine. When she next spoke, she'd lowered her voice. No one knows exactly, Grandma whispered. Some think it's a creature that's attracted to the heat and smell we give off in there. Others think it's a demon that finds a way into our realm through the dense steam clouds. No one can say for sure, because the only ones who have actually seen Mr. Longfingers aren't ever going to be able to tell you I pulled in a breath, why not Grandma? Shuffled closer along the bed and leaned towards me leaving. My question hanging in the air, don't you worry about it, sweetheart. Don't worry your pretty head, as long as you remember the rules you'll be fine. What rules? Well, when you're in the shower you try not to close your eyes for too long. 5 seconds is fine, and 10 is just about okay too, but any longer than that, yeah. Then what? Well, any longer than that, and you may just start to feel something in the room with you, something watching. And if you ever go longer than 15 seconds, that's when you might start to hear a noise, to hear what the soft tap-tap of fingers on glass fingers drumming against the glass door of the shower. If you do ever hear that noise, God forbid, will you make me a promise what Grandma promised me you'll never open your eyes. I barely slept that night, hardly at all. I'd close my eyes and try to relax, but every time I did, I'd imagine a face pressed against my bedroom window, staring in at me, and when I did finally get to sleep, I had nightmares bad. Ones I had them all week, in fact, dreams about disembodied eyes watching me in the dark and long fingers reaching out to touch my exposed skin. It wasn't any better when I was awake either, not really. The shower was the worst. That's when Grandma's story really got to me. He'd never thought about it before, but suddenly, I had trouble shutting my eyes in there. He'd be standing beneath the beating water, shampoo running down my face, and as soon as I squinted, my eyelids closed. I'd hear Grandma's words running through my head. 5 seconds is fine, and 10 is just about okay too, but any longer than that. I'd rub my hair fast, feeling the shampoo dripping off my chin, and as soon as I'd counted past 5 seconds I'd feel it, a sort of pressure, not a feeling of being watched exactly, but something close to that. I'd run my fingers faster and faster through my hair, frantically trying to get the suds out, and the ready blackness behind my closed eyes, coupled with the rush of water in my ears, would feel like a held breath, like the silence before a scream. The seconds would race through my mind, and I'd be so desperate to open my eyes again that I'd sometimes do it before my hair was rinsed fully clean, and my eyes would sting with shampoo, but before I shut them again, I'd always be sure to peer out through the steamed glass door of the shower cubicle, just to make sure I was still alone. It wasn't long before Mom realized something was up. She heard me crying out in my sleep one night, and came in to comfort me, asked me what the matter was, and it all came out. I told her about Grandma's stories and about Mr. Longfingers. She got this look on her face when I was telling her, like she used to get with me when I'd made her really mad. This wide-eyed angry look, only this time she wasn't angry with me, she was angry with Grandma. My parents' room was next to mine, and sometimes, if I pressed my ear against the wall, I could hear them talking in their soft whispers. That night though, after Mom was satisfied I wasn't scared anymore, and she'd gone back to her room, the whispers weren't soft at all. Oh no, I heard Mom hissing to Dad about Grandma, about the story she'd told me. Mom's voice floated through the wall, sharp and crisp. You know what your fucking mother's said to him now, don't you, Simon? Dad's response was an unintelligible mutter. She's told him there's a monster that'll get him if he shuts his eyes in the shower. A monster? The poor kid's been having nightmares about it all week. Seriously, Simon, you'd better say something to her tomorrow morning, first thing, or I will. Grandma came to visit me in my room the following night. That time, as she perched on the end of my bed, there were no stories, nothing like that. Grandma just sat there and stared down at me, her blue eyes wide and sad. The light from the moon outside my window lit up her wrinkled face. "You know, Heidi, never let anything bad happen to you, don't you?" she said. After a moment, I nodded my head. "I know, Grandma. You know I wouldn't let you come to any harm." I nodded again. "Okay, good, that's good." She looked away from me for a moment out the window. "You know the things I tell you in the evening are meant to help you, sweetheart. They're meant to toughen you up a bit, protect you." She paused and shook her head. "But maybe your mom's right. Maybe I went too far this time." She looked down at me and smiled. But even then, even though I was only 10 years old, I could tell it didn't quite reach her eyes ill. "Tell you what Grandma said. You know what I told you about Mr. Longfingers and the shower? Well, I'm going to make sure you're safe. He'll scare the bastard off. How about that? It won't come back in a hurry if it has to face me." I stared up at Grandma, watching her face glow in the moonlight, watching her smile down at me. I nodded my head. Once I was the one who found her. I don't know when exactly it happened, but I'd guess it was about a week after we had that talk in my room, a week after she told me she wouldn't let me come to any harm. I woke early that morning from a bad dream to a heavy thumping sound. I sat bolt upright in bed. My room was quiet around me, and I couldn't hear anything from the wall that joined my parents' room either. But the house wasn't entirely silent. Floating down the hall, muffled by my closed door, I could hear the sound of rushing water, the noise of the shower. I leaped out of bed and ran down the upstairs hallway, heart already pounding in my chest. As soon as I reached the closed bathroom door, I started banging on it. A deep terror was welling up inside me, like cold water from a well something I couldn't place, and I kept banging and shouting Grandma over and over again, even though she didn't respond. Off to my right, I was dimly aware of voices from my parents' room, the sleepy shuffle of footsteps, but before they had a chance to make it out onto the landing, I lifted my hand to test out the door handle, more out of instinct than because I thought it might actually open, but the door wasn't locked. I kept banging with my free hand, and it swung suddenly inwards, bringing me face with a wall of steam. Heat struck my skin. I squinted my eyes against the damp fog and peered into the bathroom, and before Dad pushed me to one side, before everything around me descended into shouting and tears and chaos, I saw her. I saw Grandma. She was lying naked on the floor in the shower cubicle, the water beating down around her, blue eyes bulging from her face. One hand was curled against her chest like a dead bird, while the other trailed against the glass of the shower cubicle, the flailing finger marks shed, carved through the steam, still clear and fresh. It was a heart attack that killed her, that's what my dad told me. He said Grandma was old, and the thing had struck her quickly, and suddenly she would have died fast and without pain. Dad said she wouldn't have suffered. I knew better, though. Even as a 10-year-old kid I knew better, and years later writing this, as an adult, I still know better. I also know my wife and kids resent me for refusing to have a shower in the house, for insisting everyone take baths. They pretend it's okay and they humor me, but I can tell they don't really understand it. Not at all. My wife thinks she does. She thinks I still carry the trauma of seeing my grandmother dying in front of me when I was little. I guess she's right in a way, but she doesn't know the full truth. Nobody does, and no one would believe me even if I told them. No one would believe me if I said the reason I don't take showers, the reason I haven't had one since I was 10 years old, isn't because I'm scarred from the sight of a dead body. It's because all those years ago, when I crept back into the still hat bathroom after the paramedics had taken Grandma's body downstairs, I made sure to check the marks her fingers had carved through the steamed glass of the shower cubicle. Don't touch it, I said. Not with your bare hands. My wife Anya and I stood over our son in the living room, turning his face under light. There was what appeared to be a sapling maple leaf in the outer corner of his left eye, one half of it folded over, trapped under the lid. How it had gotten there, no one knew. There were plenty of maple trees nearby, certainly, but how any of their leaves had worked itself so deeply in by accident, I couldn't say. There was of course the possibility that Luke had for some idiotic reason put it there himself, but he wasn't the sort of kid that did those kinds of things. He was a serious, quiet boy, 8 going on 80, as Anya and I always said. Even now he stood patiently as we twisted his face one way and the other, arguing over whether he should see a doctor, or if we could get the leaf out by ourselves. What if it scratches his eye? I said, hell, go blind. Don't say that, Anya scolded. It's only at the edge, we can just pull it and it will come out. She kept reaching for Luke as though to pluck the leaf between her finger and thumb, and each time I stopped, her dread washing over me at the thought of her skin coming into contact with it. I didn't know where that feeling came from or what it was exactly that I feared. Knowing didn't matter much to me though. When I had a hunch about something, I trusted it, and throughout my life I've never been wrong. Tweezers, I said. Go get them, that'll do it. I retrieved them as quickly as I could, feeling that I couldn't trust Anya not to catch hold of the leaf and attempt to work it out while I was gone. She was as stubborn in her way as I was, the majority of our disagreements revolving around which of us was right on any particular issue. That we had successfully raised a child together sometimes amazed me. When I returned with the tweezers, Anya put out her hand for them. Now hold on, I said. I have the steadier grip. Anya opened her mouth to argue, but Luke said abruptly, I want Dad to do it. He spoke calmly, without any sign of hysterics, and though this wasn't so far removed from his usual manner, I remember wanting to take a step back from him, even to turn and leave the room entirely. Only afterwards did I realize that feeling came from him, seeming to accept what was happening to him with the weary resignation of someone at the very end of their life, holding the tweezers as delicately as I could. I took hold of the end of the maple leaf, my other hand cupping the back of Luke's head and tilting it with a gentle caution towards the tool. Then I began to pull, watching the leaf emerge damp and furled with the residue of tears, only it didn't stop coming, for there was a twig attached to the end of the leaf and on it further vegetation dripping with moisture, some of it blood. Anya shrieked, but I couldn't seem to stop pulling, teasing out lengths and lengths of that delicate branch with a numb fascination. Luke didn't protest or show any kind of fear or pain, standing placidly and with complete trust in me as I continued reeling those leaves from the inside of his head. I couldn't understand how they had gotten there, imagining, with an acute disgust, my son snapping off a young branch in the park and feeding it through his eye with a tranquil concentration still. I knew even then how it must have happened in reality, or some approximation of the cause. A seed or spore had gotten in somehow, and had in the nutrient-rich warmth of the socket begun to grow. I was vaguely aware of Anya moving frantically behind me, too hypnotized by the continuous strand of leaves to pay much attention to her. Then she was leaning over me, a pair of scissors in hand, cutting the twig as close to Luke's eye as she dared so that it fell away onto the carpet. I jumped back, appalled, not wanting even my clothes to chafe against it. Luke, I said, are you okay? He blinked with difficulty, the cut stub of twig catching his upper eyelid. I'm okay, he said, I can't really feel it not that much anyway. I wished he'd yell, cry, anything that would be normal for a child in his situation to do. But he was silent all the way to the hospital, and throughout the various scans and tests that came after, as was my wife, who sat holding our son's hand as though afraid he'd vanish if she let go of him, even for a moment. She became restless each time they were separated, patrolling the waiting room until I took her by the shoulders and physically sat her down in one of the little plastic chairs. In the end, we were seen by a doctor in a private room, aware, even as we were ushered through the door, of the heaviness of that office. Luke sat in a corner with a crayon and notepad someone had given him, paying no notice to the conversation going on around him. Dr. Rillard kept glancing over at him with an expression I found unreadable and for that reason disconcerting. I immediately held the suspicion that he was hiding something from us beyond Luke's prognosis, so said, "Anya, those rays, the MRI, whatever else you've been doing all this time, what's wrong with Luke?" gathering us to a nearby wall. Dr. Rillard gestured to a set of images pinned against it. "You wanted to know how far the plant you found has grown inside him," he said in a hushed undertone. "You thought he'd gotten a seed caught in his eye, and that this all started there." "Well, didn't it?" I asked. "What do you mean by that?" But I could see the copies of Luke's scans as clearly as anyone else in the room saw. The streaks of bone amidst gray pads of muscle and organs. And through them all, like the structure of a web, the white shapes of many twigs and leaves. They were so prolific, the spread of them so profound, that it was difficult to tell where they'd begun, the roots indistinguishable from the rest of the mass. I'd seen houses like that, so infested with ivy that the brickwork loosened and came apart in its strangle. Looking at the images of my son's body, I understood that this was what was happening in front of us, and had been happening for longer than we knew. "There's nothing you can do about it?" I asked, in a harsh whisper. "No extraction process, surgery or something?" Dr. Rillard shook his head. "There's no possibility of him surviving the removal. You can see how the plant's grown through his lungs into his heart. There's already extensive damage. If we even begin to try, it'll only get worse." Anya ripped one of the pictures from the wall, her hand clenching so tightly that it crumpled at the edges. "So you're telling us that you won't do anything for our son?" she hissed. "You'll just let him die?" Dr. Rillard sighed and peered over at Luke again, who only doodled, oblivious to the whispered argument, or else ambivalent to it, in saying it's terminal. "Yes," he admitted, "we can look at options for palliative care today, or we can make another appointment. Although I can't discuss other patients in any detail, what I can say is that surgery has been tried before. In other cases, the survival rate is, well, lower than low. There's been other people here with this inside them." I asked, "What are you talking about? This is rare, surely?" I looked it up. "It's supposed to be impossible." Dr. Rillard coughed and began shuffling documents, clearly hinting that our meeting was close to its end. As I said, "I can't discuss other patients with you." Anya put her hand out, blocking his way to the doorstop. She said, "You know something about this. What caused it? How did it happen?" Dr. Rillard's eyes flicked about in agitation. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Maxwell, but I really don't. I want to go home now," said Luke in a clear, decisive voice, and we all looked at him in amazed silence, as though commanded by some greater authority. "It doesn't hurt or anything. It's really okay. If we go." He crossed the room and took his mother's hand, something he hadn't done in some time. Anya softened, and I noticed her glancing up into the fluorescent lights to stop herself crying in front of him. "Okay, baby," she said gently. "Well, go home." I lingered, staring at Dr. Rillard, until he took a worried step back from me. "Is that like the others too?" I snapped, once my wife and son had left the room. "The way Luke's acting like all this is normal, and absolutely fine." Something gave way, in the doctor's professional resolve, and he shook his head. "No, they're not all like that. Some of them get angry, and between you and me, that's a whole lot worse." In that moment I hated him, hated with all the impotent rage. I couldn't direct at the tree that was killing my son. "Yeah," I said, "you're right. What's the point, if there's nothing you can do?" Anya and I walked holding Luke's hands across the hospital parking lot, the way we always had before. Ed announced that he was too old to do it anymore. He looked at everything: birds in the sky, cars in unique colors, stones on the ground, with the same easy interest with which Head always examined the world, unaffected by the twig that was already beginning to extend from his eye again. I wondered why it didn't hurt to have it grow through him, and presumably feed on him, perhaps. Some hormone had released from the leaves to make him a more agreeable host. I'd been thinking of it as a disease since the beginning, I realized, and likely infectious. At that, I felt an impulse to ask Luke questions about it, wanting to know why he wasn't scared of death, but he seemed so small and innocent to me then that I couldn't bring myself to do it, torn up into pieces by my grief. I forced myself merely to walk with him, nodding at each comment he made, as though it didn't kill me to hold it all together. A man approached us from our right, stumbling, a little homeless, I thought at first, or drunk, and I felt sorry for him, struggling across the tarmac in the heat, likely with nowhere to go. Then, as he came closer, swiveling his head towards us, I saw that there were rose thorns growing out of his every facial orifice, petals dripping free of them, like blood. He was stumbling because he was blind, and had been abandoned in that parking lot by friends or family, likely terrified of him, and with no idea of what else to do. Anya gave a little scream of shock, but Luke only stood still, watching the stranger, without visible fear or horror at his appearance. "Sir," I said, feeling I had to be kind to bring some normalcy to the situation. "Sir, let me help you." The man jumped slightly at the sound of my voice, apparently still able to hear, at least in some capacity. He shuffled nearer, and I realized the danger of approaching him this way. "Some of them get angry," the doctor had said after. "All, sir," I said again, this time with more caution. "I just want to help my sons like you." "He has your condition." The man nodded, and I saw as he opened his mouth wider to speak that his tongue had been slit in two by the thorns. His words were a sort of mumbled gargle, improperly formed. "It'll happen to all of us," he told me. "It's catching somehow. Anyone that's close gets it too. That's what they're saying out there." Anya tried pulling Luke away towards the car, signing for me to follow to the old man. I said, "Who's saying it, and out where?" but he only bumbled hopelessly on towards the hospital entrance, and I let him go, feeling pity that he was only going to be turned out onto the street again to die. We tried to keep Luke comfortable at home. In the weeks after that, which was simple enough, being that he would sit watching cartoons or reading comic books without a care for the growths, we had to cut back from his face day by day. One night, as Anya and I were putting him to bed, Luke asked, "When I'm a tree, will you plant me outside in the yard, so I can still be here with you?" I knelt beside him, avoiding looking at the maple leaf. I could see, flattened to the inside of his mouth. "You're not going to be a tree, buddy," I said. "We're not going to let that happen." "All right." Luke looked at me sadly. "I know you can't fix me, Dad. Honey, come here a sec," said Anya, and she tugged at my arm, attempting to draw me away. "I'm not going to let anything hurt you, Lukey," I insisted. "I want." Anya ushered me to the door and went to kiss Luke on the forehead. "Night, baby," she said. "Don't worry about this anymore." Once we were back downstairs again, she punched my shoulder lightly. "You can't say things like that." "Why not?" I protested. "I mean it, you know the doctor was right. You've seen how things are going, and even though we hide it from him, Luke sees it too." By then we'd learned what the man in the parking lot had been talking about from online platforms and televised. News we'd become media addicts, unable to keep ourselves from watching update after update dissecting each new theory, before cycling back to the old again, in a compulsive and fascinated dread. It began with country people, farmers and orchard workers, anyone that worked closely with plants, particularly trees, and came into contact with them daily. The friends and relatives that had survived them all reported their loved ones coming home with injuries like Luke's, which leaves thorns or parts of flower heads began protruding from cuts or bodily apertures. Attempts had been made to cut out the growing plants or amputate infested limbs to kill the infection, but the trees were stubborn, grew deeply and heartily in their flower beds of flesh. All of these early victims had died in one way or another. Some, in the late stages of their growths, had gone out to their places of work and stood amongst the trees and flowers, their succumbing willingly to the takeover in the belief that they weren't merely dying but becoming something else, which to them wasn't such a terrible thing. Afterwards, government agents had come by and taken them away to be studied, which had resulted in outcry amongst the relatives until the phenomenon became so widely spread that it was obviously necessary. Others amongst the first of the Woodas, those affected, became rapidly known did not die quietly. They became enraged by their oncoming ends, vandalizing the fields and groves they saw as responsible for their condition before killing themselves, often via emulation, so that they took the invading lives inside their bodies with them. It would never be known how the crop would spread, whether by touch, or if spores lying dormant in the bodies of their hosts had simply activated in sympathy with those around them. Whatever the case, the areas where these initial instances of infection began were closed off from outsiders. The plants on those properties contained or safely discarded, but this didn't stop the phenomenon creeping into villages, towns and cities where trees and other plant life were scarce. Scientists were consulted on the epidemic, invited to share their hypotheses on talk shows and news channels. There was no agreed explanation among them. Some believed that certain plants had communicated via chemical signals and fungal systems in order to develop a form of attack against the destructive human race, whereas others believed that what they were witnessing was the rise of a new parasitic life form, able to take on various physical characteristics. One scientist, an outlier, quickly shunned by her colleagues, believed that the subjects that resigned themselves to their change had been correct, and that what they were experiencing was a rapid stage of human evolution. Notice that it always starts from within and grows outwards. She said the plants even resemble the person they came from in small ways. I don't think we should be destroying these people young. That's what they are still, but honoring what nature has decided. They become. This did not go down well amongst viewers, provoking a fresh surge of violence in response. Anya held my hand as we watched crowds set fire to forests across our television screen, some of them still partially human and screaming out to be saved. Journalists milled around with microphones, accosting masked arsonists for commentary. We need trees for fuel to build things, and most importantly, oxygen is burning them all. The wisest course of action. A young man in a navy balaclava shrugged his shoulders It's them or us, isn't it? Well, it's both of us with this approach, said the journalist, adjusting his glasses and blinking against the sweat falling behind them. Without trees, we're talking ecological devastation, climate change. But the young man was already wandering away through the smoke, disinterested in the discussion. As the weeks passed and our fear mounted, another group arose amidst the chaos. These people claimed to have developed a chemical that could be injected, bathed in, or ingested, destroying the infecting plant while leaving the host alive. Many dismissed the notion, claiming that it was snake oil being sold on the streets. A dangerous drug that would maim or kill anyone that used it. Many turned to it. Anyway, they were going to die after all, whether they touched the chemical or not. There were attempts to criminalize its sale and manufacture, but with anyone able to afford to seeking refuge in bunkers and other quarantine spaces and vigilantes. Rounding up the wood to burn, there was no regulating anything anymore. Anya and I attempted to maintain some semblance of ordinary routine around the house. It was all that kept us stable, tricking ourselves into skirting the edge of breakdown rather than tipping headfirst into it, as so many others had done. We tried to keep Luke from learning of any of what was going on in the world, switching off our shows or locking our phones when he entered a room. Yet sometimes in the night, I'd slip downstairs to find him camped out in front of the TV, watching whatever news channels he could find, and idly picking at the maple leaf that had begun its sneaking progress out of his eye. Again one morning, I found he wasn't in his bed, and after looking all over the house, I admitted to Anya that he was likely no longer indoors. Where would he go? Asked Anya, the shake in her voice breaking every word into 2 syllables. Where is he? But her gaze, like mine, had already fallen on the back door, which stood open into the yard. We went to it side by side, not wanting to see what we knew from 1,000 similar televised images would be there. Anya let out a sound, not a scream, which would have been better, less awful than the sound that seemed to come from her very gut. Thick and deep, I staggered out into the yard, driven as people sometimes are to be close to terrible things and prove that they are real. Lookier. What Luke now wasp knelt on the lawn, his little body held upright by the tree that had grown up through his throat, his spine, the stave that allowed it its progression towards the sun. His arms swung useless at his sides, and his eyes, I couldn't stand to look at his eyes. I saw them without seeing, intentionally blurring my focus to avoid taking them in, while Anya stood crying against the back door. I walked with a dull sense of purpose over to the shed, and came out wearing a pair of thick gardening gloves, a spade clenched under one arm. As I advanced on what was left of my son, Anya called out to me, "What are you doing burying him?" I said flatly. "The funeral homes won't take him, and sooner or later the government will send people by to pick him up for whatever it is they're doing with the bodies, or the vigilantes will come knocking. This is a better way." I closed my fists over the handle of the spade, tried to think of Luke's body as a doll or a scarecrow, some other inanimate thing that only looked like something dead. "Alex," said Anya, "don't, please, just leave him, leave him. This is what he wanted. It's what that thing wanted." I snapped at her. That thing through his brain wanted him to die out here. "Don't you see that?" Anya watched me, pleading with silent tears in her eyes, and in the end, I didn't touch him, not because of her, but because the thought of doing so sickened me. We left Luke there for weeks to slowly decompose, and the tree spread its branches from him. Through the long afternoon, as it had longed for, I kept the blinds down on that side of the house then, and suspected that our neighbors did the same. Once in the following days, I peeked out to see Anya standing by the maple tree, talking to it the way she did to Luke, and I couldn't help but notice the way The leaves had grown over the skull looked like a face. A month later, Anya and I lay in bed holding each other, weary with grief and the uncertainty of everything, neither of us talking much, there being nothing to say, running my hand over her back. I felt something sharp under her right shoulder blade, and choked on a breath as it came loose in my fingertips. "What's wrong?" asked Anya, pulling back from me slightly, to frown through the gloom. "Nothing," I said. "Cramp, that's all. I'd better get up and stretch it out." I went down into the kitchen, and after shutting the door behind me, looked down at what I was holding. There was a maple leaf in my hand, the first sign of what was growing inside Anya, and was now surely in me as well. I leant against the counter and cried, like a little kid cried, for the sun I'd lost, and the light I was losing, and for myself dying, without any idea of how much time I had left till then. I hadn't understood how those consumed by the plants didn't feel what was inside them, how they remained completely ignorant, until they began to force their way visibly from under the skin. I'd be convinced myself that they must have known, only lied to themselves about the sensations and symptoms of having their bodies invaded. The functions of their organs slowed down, even stopped entirely by the obstructing vegetation. Now I understood, for now I was aware of what was growing through my body. I could feel it, the fullness of that new organism, and its development through my muscles and into the chambers of my brain. I felt it like another part of me, and I could see now how some of the infected succumbed to it. Even imagined themselves becoming something new and good. Anya would be one of those people. I knew she had been changed since Luke had died, had given up on what was left of life, being that she had lost hers with him. Maybe when she felt the maple close in over her heart, shed go out into the backyard and stand with him, let the things that had killed them both grow together long after even their bones were worked down to their dust. As I walked shakily back into the bedroom and lay down in the dark, I decided that I wouldn't do the same. I had seen myself in the faces of the raging protesters in the news, had already made myself familiar with the local backstreet vendors of the chemicals they say can cure, even if I don't quite believe it. One day soon I'll inject myself in Anya with that product, and wait for it to work on the enemies inside us, and if it does not, God am sorry for it, but I'll burn the maple in the yard that's still eating the scraps of my son, and then my wife and I. The world is ending in forest fires, but I'd rather go out that way, go out angry, still a husband, a father, still a man. I stare out of his living room window as a bird sits on the railing of his porch. It's a cardinal, the first one I've seen in my entire life in Colorado. You see all types of wildlife, but I always seem to spot something exotic whenever I visit Owen. The bird flies away, never to be seen again. I turn my attention back to Owen, who's on his phone next to me. His dark brown hair covers his eyes, as his head is tilted downward every time I sleep over at his house. It always ends up like this. He doesn't have a single streaming service. Every game he owns is single player, and he lives in the woods. Although the closest gas station is only about an hour's walk away, which honestly sounds preferable to just sitting around. Owen, let's walk to town, I say, casually, trying not to reveal how unbearably bored I am. In response, he glances up at me, then looks out the window. It's gonna be dark out in like 30 minutes. His voice sounds slightly annoyed. I pull out my phone and check the time. Shit, haze, right. It's already almost 8. Any ideas? Then I ask. I drop my phone in my lap and look at him again. His baggy hoodie looks incredibly comfortable right about now. I always managed to visit his cold-ass house, unprepared. I would ask to wear it, but I don't. Want his mom getting the wrong idea if she sees me? Maybe I could invite Kevin over. He looks back at his phone nonchalantly. I narrow my eyes at him, and reach over, punching him in the shoulder. I would rather fucking die, I spit out in mock. Scolding tone, he rubs his shoulder, laughing as he sets his phone down. Damn Claire, well, could we do my Ouija board? I groan as he says this because we use the Ouija board every time we see each other pass. I reply dismissively. I lean back on the couch, staring up at the skylight in his ceiling. Despite living in the middle of nowhere, his house is actually quite a bit fancier than mine. What if we play the Midnight Man? He asks. My eyes light up at this. No way does he have a new game. I sit up, looking him dead in the eyes. Is it multiplayer? I ask, excitedly. Yeah, but it's not a video game, he replies coolly. I sink back down on the couch slightly, giving him an unimpressed stare. What is it then? It's like a scary game, like Bloody Mary. I smile, as he mentions Bloody Mary, finding it cute that he wants to do something so childish. But I guess it would be entertaining compared to rotting in his living room. Alright, what are the rules? Then he looks down at his phone, scrolling for a bit, as he clears his throat. So basically, we write our names on a piece of paper, and then, oh, it says we need to do it at 12 a.m. I scoff and lean back against the couch, staring at him with amusement. Is there another one we could do then? I ask with a smile. Let me check. Owen replies with a small chuckle. I wait impatiently for him to find another game, my eyes wandering back out the window, staring into the woods. Am always half expecting to see a bear out there. I found one. It's called Forest Lady. Wow, these names are out of this world, huh? Shut up. This one looks cool. We just go out into the woods and say Forest Lady 3 times. After that we set a timer for a minute, and then if we see her, we need to not be afraid. And if she starts singing we're dead. I can't help but laugh at the rules, which sound like they were written by a middle schooler, but I'm actually kind of excited. It'd be fun to see him. A little scared, so after waiting about 10 minutes for it to get darker, we head out of the house. Alright, we gotta be back inside in 30 minutes. Owen says as he reads a text from his mom. Cool, we might have time to do a few then, I reply. He switches on his phone's flashlight as we go deeper into the woods. Now that I'm out here, I actually feel kind of tense. The idea of seeing some lady out here is straight out of a nightmare. I glance at Owen's face for some reassurance, but can't make it out in the dark. Do you think this is far enough? I ask. Sure. Let's do it here, Owen replies. We both sit on the forest floor, agreeing. It'd be smart to sit back to back so we can watch from all angles. Okay, do we both say it at the same time? I ask, already regretting not asking for his hoodie, as I shiver from the cold. It doesn't say, but it'll just say it, he replies. No, let me do it. Well, go ahead, then remember to say it 3 times. I lean my back closer to his, seeking warmth. Alright, Forest Lady, Forest Lady, Forest Lady. He starts the 1-minute timer on his phone, setting it on the ground between us so we can both see it. I count down the seconds in my head while staring into the dark woods. The time drags on. Every noise makes my eyes shoot in that direction. Eventually my eyes land on something. In the distance, it looks strange. I stare at it for what feels like forever, until I realize what I'm looking at. It's a barely illuminated tree, but with no branches. It looks like a pole sticking out of the ground. It's bizarre. Did someone take all the branches off one by one, or did it just grow like that? I jolt out of my thoughts as the alarm rings. 60 seconds. We survived. Owen lets out a yelp at the sound, and I giggle. We both stand up, brushing dirt and leaves off our shorts. Well, looks Like we won, I say, with a small chuckle. Yeah, that wasn't so bad. Wanna do another one, he asks. I think about it for a moment, glancing back at the branchless tree in the distance. Something tells me one is enough. Nah, let's head back inside, in freezing. I reply, trying to sound casual, but something about the woods is urging me to leave quickly. He doesn't ask any questions. He picks his phone up from off the ground and shoves it into his hoodie pocket. We start walking back toward his house, still close enough to see the porch lights through the trees. Honestly, something in me is sure I'm not going to make it. That the forest lady is going to pull me deep into the woods. God, what a dumb name of something to be scared of, but eventually we do. Make it back, walking inside. It's still cold, but not nearly as cold as the woods. We kick off our shoes and walk into the dining room, where his mom is cooking something in the oven. Home already? Owen's mom asks, with a smirk. Yeah, we were just doing a quick game thing, Owen replies casually. He and I take a seat at the table. I've always liked his mom. She's pretty cool. She also treats us like what we are, just friends. My mom doesn't even let us sleep on the same side of the house. That's like the only pro of staying over here. What kind of game was it? She asks, taking chicken nuggets out of the oven. It was like a creepy ritual type thing. Owen answers. I glare at him as he says this. Is he crazy? My mom would freak out if she knew we were doing something like that. Even though I'm only a year away from being an adult, she makes us both a plate of chicken nuggets, squeezes ketchup onto each plate, and walks over, setting them in front of us before taking a seat herself. Oh really, did I ever tell you guys about when I did something like that? She says. My glare on Owen drops, and I look at her with surprise. She always impresses me with how cool she is. Owen and I both shake our heads no, curious and excited. Well, it was my first year of high school. A group of girls walked up to me during gym. They told me they were going to do a ritual type thing in the bathroom. I was new and wanted to make friends, so I tagged along. Owen and I eat silently as we listen to her story. Her stories are always the best. I glance at him with a smile, before looking back at his mom. They led me to a small bathroom with just a toilet and a sink. The girls had a candle with them, which they lit and set on the counter. They told me to say some nonsensical phrase in front of the mirror, so I went along with it, saying the phrase a few times. She takes a long drink of water before continuing. Something in her eyes tells me this story isn't like the usual ones. She tells after that they flicked off the lights and ran out, locking the door behind them. I panicked and scrambled to find the light switch, but I couldn't find it, and I couldn't find the door either. The air in the bathroom went cold, and I felt an overwhelming dread. I begged for them to let me out, but I couldn't hear them anymore. But I finally managed to calm down, and sat on the ground. I started repeating "you can't stop me" over and over again, hyping myself up, trying to stop my panic attack. Eventually it worked, so I calmly stood back up and started looking for the light switch again. This time, I found it. I flicked it on, unlocked the door, and the girls were nowhere to be seen. Owen's mom chuckles, moving blonde hair out of her face as she takes a bite of chicken. I felt invincible after that, like I accomplished something larger than me, she says with a smile. Owen, and I look at her in awe. She always has something to talk about. I wonder what other stories she's been keeping from us. Eventually we finish our food, and his mom returns to her room, telling us not to stay up too late. Owen sets himself up on a bed on the floor, while I lay down on the couch. Good night, Owen, I say as I get comfortable. Good night, he replies, already sounding like he's about to fall asleep. I chuckle and yawn, turning away from him. I always face toward the couch when I sleep over, because he has a creepy-ass long dark hallway that I hate having to look at. I pull out my phone and turn the volume all the way down, starting a video with captions as I prepare to fall asleep, unfortunately a few hours later, and am still awake, with probably my 7th video playing. My eyes are drowsy and barely open. I've dealt with Onondath insomnia most of my life, and of course it decides to show up tonight, eventually. I turn off my phone and roll onto my other side, looking down at Owen. I envy how peacefully he sleeps. His soft breathing and the ticking of the clock on the wall are the only sounds filling the room. Then I glance toward the hallway. I start having that feeling again, the same one I had in the woods. Why am I scared all of a sudden? Why am I tense? I look away from the endless void of the hallway and opt to stare up at the ceiling instead. So I roll onto my back and look up. My throat threatens to erupt with a scream, but no sound comes out. My eyes widen so fast it makes me dizzy. There's a face looking down at me. A face is pressed into the glass of the skylight. The glare of the lamp on the glass hides most of it, but I know what I'm seeing. There is no way this is a trick of the light. There's a woman up there looking straight at me. The most overwhelming dread imaginable wraps around my neck like a noose. I try to make a sound, any sound, but nothing comes out. I need to wake Owen up. He needs to help me. Then I nearly jump out of my skin when I hear him speak. Thank fucking God, Hayes awake. I look down at him instinctively, just about to finally manage a scream, but then I hear what Hayes saying. 59, 58, 57. Hayes counting. Why the fuck is he counting? And then it hits me, something more terrifying than a tree without branches. More terrifying than a bear in the woods. More terrifying than a woman watching me from the skylight. This game was single player, and I was the one who said the ritual. My eyes shoot back up to the skylight. The woman's face is still there. The forest lady's skin is pale. Her eyes are wider than mine. She's the scariest, most unbearable thing I have ever seen. My head spins, my throat closes. I think about how I want Owen to save me, how I want his mom to protect me. Oh fuck, write the rules of the game. I can't be afraid. Shit, I can't be afraid. 44, 43, 42. My lips, heart trembling, and I force out a barely audible whisper. You can't stop me. 39, 38. 37, you can't stop me. 36, 35, you can't stop me. 34, you can't stop me. I repeat it over and over again, louder each time. Owen's dreadful counting begins to blur in the back of my mind. I don't hear it anymore. All I hear is myself repeating, and then the face is gone. It doesn't leave, it just isn't there anymore. That's when I notice the sound of rain tapping against the skylight glass. I look down at Owen, and I can hear his breathing again, soft and slow. I hear the clock, it's ticking, mimicking the countdown from moments ago. I glance back up. The faint glow of sunrise is beginning to peek into the sky. I had one, I won the game, and I did it alone. There's a feeling in my chest I can't explain. It's like the tides of the universe are washing over me, a calm dread, a knowing I experienced something larger than life, and I survived. I stand up, my legs shaky, and lower myself to the ground beside Owen. I slide under part of his blanket and pull it over me. He groans quietly. In response, deep in sleep, I feel at peace. I feel the most at peace I have ever felt. As I'm lying next to Owen listening to the rainfall on the roof, I slowly drift off to sleep. Hello, my grandson told me this was a good place to tell my stories. Says I can't tell him anymore because they keep giving him nightmares. Can you believe that? 13 and still getting nightmares. We should have seen it coming when we stopped disciplining them. Right now they're rotten, and the world gets more rotten as they get more control of it. I love the kid though, gets straight Us leads the football team haze better than I ever was anyway. I shouldn't ramble, Doc says. If I do, I may finally lose the plot for good. Don't really know what that means. I think it's a joke, but I was never the comedic type. Guess that's why I got into the private eye game in the first place. Most of my peers went out to the big city to be famous actors or to marry one. But not me. I saw through all that bullshit. Saw the city for what it really was, a big bundle of secrets and horrors, waiting to be unwrapped. I was right, of course. I saw it all, still do, made certain sacrifices to make sure of that the beasts of hedonism that rise from those parties in the hills, the sickening demons that haunt those people you worship so deeply that you wish to be taught. Say you don't worship them, I know you do. I see deep into your heart, I can grip your dreams and squeeze the juices of your wants from them. Once I reveal my truth, you'll come to me begging for me to rip it from you, mind for me to free you of this unholy truth. And I want you'll have to live with these horrors like I have to. I must have been in the business for 50 years before I finally retired. I think my first case got turned into a TV episode. Some writer probably pulled the strings for it all to happen to see his story in real life. So he'd know exactly how to turn it into fiction. Happens more than you'd think, which, I guess for most people would be at all. I don't know, I just remember my first phone call, and how excited I was, 'cause not only was it a famous actress, but she was calling me to help catch and handle some creeper fan of hers beating down creeps is a bit of a passion of mine, alongside watching Jeopardy with my lovely wife and gardening down at the church's greenhouse. So I went to her house, and she gave me some details on the guy, enough to get a good picture of his look anyway. And I began my first stakeout. It was boring, but I expected that. Takes a lot out of a young man sitting in the dark, and having to ignore all the more interesting noises calling his name. I waited the whole night, the whole next night too, and eventually I gathered that whoever this guy was probably has an idea that I'm here. I guess a stalker would learn how to avoid being stalked. With the success rate of the stakeouts seeming bust, I pitched this lady the idea that I look out from a location farther from the house to help coax out our friend, which of course she hated, 'cause she, though I was trying to cheat her out her money or something of that nature. So she decides that we should end our business partnership the next time I see her face. She's in the paper. Bumpkin lucks out, was the headline, if I recall correctly. Turns out, she ended up marrying this no-name from out of town. I don't know what came over me to do what I did next, but I ended up bringing them a wedding present, a thanks for giving me my first gig. I guess the nicest champagne I could afford, wrapped in the cheapest paper I could find. I walked over to her estate, hopped the new gate, which was not easy because it was larger than any home gate ought to be, and knocked on the door. Lucky for me, the actress opens the door. If it had been anyone else, I'd likely have been shot, stuffed, and paraded at every annual Hollywood Hunters Gala until the end of time. I go to hand her the bottle, but something off. Her eyes were hazy, and this kind of sugary scent seemed to pour out of her mouth. So potent was the smell, it almost seemed to take physical form, like in the cartoons. It's like she's been caught in a smoke of subservience, as if marriage hand sanded all her edges, turning the firecracker who'd first hired me into just another housewife. That was the first and last time I ever felt anything for a client. Pity for this trapped woman, and rage towards the bumpkin who'd done it to her. So like a moron, I asked to come inside. I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't looking for answers, rather a fight. Don't know how that'd solve anything, but it'd make me feel better. The inside of the house was the portrait of perfection. Beautiful, yet two-dimensional. Sure, this looked like the kind of place where you could start a family, but there was no real love, only someone's perverse idea of it. They had everything you'd need, and even more stuff that you wouldn't. A jukebox sat in one of the corners, blasting this some quartets. Love song about how deep in the dark your kiss would thrill me. Creepy lyrics in the modern day, and even back then, they unsettled me. Can I get you a drink, detective? No, I brought my own. I used to have this flask I took everywhere, lost it when some crude cultists tossed me into the Pacific. Real shame to that flask helped to comfort me through many late-night drives through the city. Could I ask you a few questions? Actually, oh heavens, whatever could they be about? I could ask about that funny way she was talking, but I thought if I got to the bottom of the whole case I'd figure that out. This husband of yours, he make you happy as a clam. Nice, I think. I read about it in the paper, but jog my memory. How'd you two meet? Seems awfully lucky for some country kid to find love with a woman like yourself. You must understand, in the lucky one, Hayes simply a dream. Her voice was giddy. And that's good and all, but please tell me how you met at a restaurant. He was my waiter, and I don't know, it was simply love at first sight, or love after appetizers may be a more fitting title. Waiter, I was dismissive as anyone would be. I like to think you sound like my mother. I don't mean to be rude, it's just such a tale maybe, but aren't all the best love stories? As she spoke, I walked around the living room scanning everything I could. I looked for some kind of wedding photo. Strange for a newlywed couple to not litter them all over the house. Why are you doing that? What, you're snooping? Apologies, it's just my nature. I noticed you don't have any photos of your husband anywhere. Yes, he doesn't like them kept around the house. Says it's vain, humble guy. He does let me keep one. She touched the heart-shaped locket around her neck. How did I not notice that? A novice mistake, but I was a novice, so I guess it makes sense still. It's no excuse. May I see? She nods, opens the heart, and hands it to me. My blood ran cold. The man in this photo was my guy. Every detail matched her description. Somehow that stalker had achieved his final goal. Had won. The thundering of the gates opening broke the silence. I was soon to be trapped and exposed, losing anyway. To save this woman, I had to think quickly. Where is your restroom? Upstairs, thank you. I burst into a sprint towards the stairs. You must really have to go. Been holding it all day, but don't you want to meet Fred? I didn't have time to answer. I rushed down the hall and locked myself in the bathroom. The minute I found it, I lucked out too, because there was a window. Certainly wouldn't be a comfortable time getting out, but I was grateful for any escape at all. I heard the door open downstairs and some muffled conversation. Against my better judgment, I decided to see if there was anything in the bathroom that could help me piece together what was going on. Unfortunately, it was practically shining. It was so clean. The only mess was a pair of pants lying in the corner. I went to pick them up, and a small perfume bottle slipped out of the pocket. I didn't get a great look at the thing before it shattered, but I certainly smelt whatever was inside after the fact. More sweetness, the same sweetness in fact. What was that shit? I scooped up the glass, shoved it in my pocket, popped open the window, and began to shimmy out. More muffled conversation, now angry and panicked, served as the soundtrack to my escape. When I was able to pop myself out, I surveyed the property from the roof. The yard was torn up, like someone had been trying to find treasure, and the gate was luckily close enough that I could hop it if I got a running start. The doorknob in the bathroom began to rattle violently, and I moved to make my leap. I've never been much of an athlete, but in that moment, I transformed into Jesse Owens, catching enough speed to float over the gate. My landing was not so graceful. I hit the asphalt like a sack of bricks, and had to attempt to recover from having the wind knocked out of me as I ran. From the house I expected some kind of car to chase me down in the street, but it was silent. I was home free. The only damage to me would be done to my ears as the unmistakable sound of gunshots rang out from the actress' house. I knew I had to go back, but I couldn't go alone. I looked for houses, but for the first time I saw just how secluded we really were. The sounds of Hollywood surrounded us, but the people making them must have been miles away. There was nothing I could do, so like a coward I ran. She was dead, or he was. Those were the only two outcomes. I decided I drank myself into a stupor, trying to drown the guilt, but only giving myself a horrible hangover, which I figured I deserved. I woke up the next morning to the sound of the TV blaring some rerun of the previous night's programs. It was a talk show, and who should be sitting on the couch but the actress and her stalker, both wholly alive. "Alright," the old lady says, "I got to get off the computer so she can use it for Scrabble. With friends it's a fun game, I'll finish this some other time." "I think this is good to do," blotted. Those old pulp writers used to call it a cliffhanger. Alright, goodbye. Am not really into horror, never have been, but to make friends, you have to blend in first. You laugh at the jokes, play their games, ignore the red flags until you know which ones are real. Looking back, I didn't make the best decision you might hate me for it, but I did what I could. It started when my friends forced me to play a game. I had a suspicion they only wanted me there because they liked laughing at how I cried during horror games, but I let it slide. We were in my apartment one weekend. I was supposed to be home alone. They were trying to download a horror game for free, but the link redirected us to another site. It looked like a map with hundreds of scattered pins, each one marked a real suicide location. Click on a pin and it showed the photo the victim's lifeless body on the scene. Was that even legal? My friends looked fascinated. I thought it was disturbing, but I kept quiet. Didn't want to be the buzzkill, not in high school. That's basically social suicide. At the top of the site, in small gray text, it read, "Please read the rules before usage," but nobody seemed to care. Apparently you could add your own pins. They started marking random addresses with yellow pins. 5 or 6 addresses, just for curiosity. The ones already there were red. I didn't like it. The red ones felt wrong. Then one of the 4 friends grinned. "Yo, Alex, look." He zoomed in on my street, my building, and pinned my apartment. I laughed along, even though my stomach twisted at the end. They left me alone, with that game still open in my browser, even though they promised to stay the night. That night I went back to the site. I wanted to delete the pins, especially mine, but I couldn't. That's when I checked the rules. You may add and move pins, you cannot delete them, so I had no option. The next day my parents came home. My sister Tashed snuck out to see her boyfriend while the house was empty. Everything felt normal again, like nothing ever happened. That night, I was watching TV with my dad when a breaking news report came on a suicide case of an entire family. The house on the screen looked familiar. Then the address appeared. I remembered where I saw it. I stood up quietly without making a commotion. I walked to my room, opened the site. Only a few yellow pins were left, and I found what I was looking for. My hands shook. As I clicked, it was the same address, the same house. And the photos I checked, the other pins that had turned red, more suicide photos than right. In front of me, another yellow pin turned red. Only one yellow pin remained mine. I froze, then clicked it. The image loaded slowly. It was me. Sitting at my desk, I turned to the window. The curtain moved, a soft shift-like breath. My chest clenched. I rose step by step, as if something unseen was dragging the air behind me. I pulled the curtain open, and there she was, standing just outside the glass. 14 floors up. She smiled softly. I am sorry for peeking, but can you help me please? Let me in. I stared at her. How did you climb to the 14th floor? Her face twitched. She lunged at the window. I slammed it shut and locked it. Her smile twisted, stretched unnaturally wide. She began pounding on the glass, screaming, "You have to die. You have to die. You pinned the location. You have to die." I backed away. Then I remembered you can't delete the pins, but you can move them. I scrambled to the computer, clicked on the yellow pin over my apartment, and dragged it anywhere just somewhere else. The banging stopped. I turned around. She was smiling, peaceful. Then she crawled down the building, disappearing. I sat there, breathing hard, shaking as my heart pounded, and I almost teared up. I looked back at the monitor to see where I pinned it, and it hovered over an address I didn't recognize, an orphanage. I stared at it, then I moved it to the house of the friend who pinned me. The news showed another case a few days later, another suicide, another whole family. I didn't want this To happen to anyone I didn't mean for anyone else to die. I started digging, looking for more info on the site. Most of it was garbage, but I found one line that stuck. When a specific address is pinned, all current residents will die. It will be ruled as suicide. This isn't a game, it's murder, paranormal murder. I can't forgive myself, even if I did it to live, to save my family, and I still go back to the site, just to make sure no one ever moves a pin back to me.